Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Joe Patrick on Football, where we finally have a win to talk about, a Falcons win, breaking their 5-game losing streak. Now, this might be infuriating for a lot of people to talk about a win and kind of be optimistic about it, but honestly, life is too short not to enjoy wins. So, I'm not gonna go streaking around my house or anything, but I'm going to enjoy what we saw and not feel like I wasted, a Sunday afternoon watching bad football. And it did start out that way. It was kind of brutal. After each team had possession a couple of times, there had been one total yard gained between these two teams. The Falcons having had 3 at that point, and the Saints having had -2 total yards through their opening 2 possessions. But ultimately, things did come around, and it was obviously a successful day for the Falcons, beating the Saints 24-10, and doing it behind Kirk Cousins, a very different look Falcons offense led by Kirk Cousins, and we will talk about that in a little bit. He ultimately threw for just about 200 yards, 199, with 2 touchdowns and 1 interception. That touchdown, one of the touchdowns, I should say, being a bomb to Darnell Mooney on that deep post. Like, that's like a classic. It felt like that was like a Matt Ryan to Roddy White touchdown right there on the play action stretch, and then boom, hit him over the top on I think it was like on a 1st and 10. A lot more play action, by the way. Again, something we're going to talk about when we talk about this offense. But Kirk Cousins, relatively effective day. Well, not perfect, obviously. The interception comes on a deflection. Also fumbled, although the Falcons were able to recover that one. It's interesting just to see the difference in the way that he and Michael Penix kind of operate in the pocket. And Kirk Cousins is going to be kind of more statuesque, and I think that you can obviously make the argument that that makes it easy to get home if you're a defending player, but I think that one of the reasons he kind of looks statuesque at times is because he's actually trying to do his best to buy himself time and to basically stay as perfectly positioned behind his blockers as he can be. And I give him a lot of credit for, like, he will step up in a really tight pocket, and sometimes it doesn't work out. He just kind of gets swallowed up in there. It looks like a little child kind of being jumped on by a bunch of big guys. But he also was able to sometimes deliver out of those really tight pockets, which, obviously Michael Penix at this point in his career is not nearly as effective in doing. And obviously Penix has strengths that Kirk Cousins clearly doesn't have. But I think the coaching staff was overall generally correct and accurate in saying that, we were going to build a scheme around Kirk Cousins going into this game, and that would be why we will get better results than what we got earlier this year when we saw Kirk Cousins start against the Miami Dolphins in another game, by the way, where he didn't have Drake London, just like today. And yeah, he did look a lot better. We'll also talk about the Falcons' defense kind of staying on track, and not even just staying on track, kind of doing the job they need to do, and maybe a little bit more. But obviously continuing their really strong ways, especially in pressure. And also, if I forget to mention it by the end of the podcast today, Falcon special teams was well, I guess the whole thing wasn't good. There was another bad kick return given up that cost the Falcons a score early in that game, I believe. Yeah. But I was thinking about the kicker, just the kicking situation. Zane Gonzalez hitting kicks from 50 plus, with plenty to spare, by the way. Some of these kicks from, like, I think it was a 54-yarder or 56-yarder, hit the net, like, cleanly, up above the goalpost, or the crossbar. So good to see Zane Gonzalez doing his thing there. But let's talk about this Falcons offense. Obviously, it wasn't like the most consistent throughout the game. Just like there were still the frustrating 3-and-outs, especially early in the game. That was particularly frustrating. They have a 3-and-out in the third quarter that proved to be their only drive of that entire quarter. And we'll talk more kind of plaudits about the Falcons defense a little bit later. But, the Falcons were pinned in kind of at their own 2-yard line, I think, to start that drive, and just tried to run the ball 3 times and not really make sure they didn't turn the ball over, get themselves into any trouble. But another frustrating kind of 3-and-out there where you felt like that was going to come back and bite the Falcons just to give the ball right back. But when, it also was very effective in certain ways. And, we talked a little bit earlier about Kirk Cousins delivering from the pocket, but, it was also just really interesting to see, first of all, the team get right back into a majority under center offense. It certainly felt that way to me. I know I did recognize early in the game they were still continuing to run pass plays out of pistol, but it felt like as the game went on, they were basically going to like almost exclusively play action passing from under center in the pass game, and it was working. You know, that's honestly what a lot of the best offenses do is use play action as much as possible. And, it's obviously been a Falcons team that has run some of the least amount of play action so far this season. Well, Michael Penix was the starting quarterback, and it was also the least effective. So, like, you couldn't even argue, I guess, that much that they weren't running it that much because it wasn't even effective in the first place. Maybe you could argue that if they ran it more, it would prove to be more effective. But clearly, it's just a different offense today. And, I thought it helped. I thought that, I don't know if it's just my own bias and that it's just kind of like easier on the eye. It's kind of what I understand to be like, a highly operating NFL offensive football team to be just kind of playing in that way, playing from under center. But it felt like it was more effective to me. And I don't think too many people are going to argue with that notion, even though the yards, again, weren't great. It's not like there was like huge numbers being put up or anything, but the play action passing game just felt like it was working to the extent it needed to work. And gosh, Zach Robinson, like it's going to be interesting. I think obviously the talking point coming out of this is going to be, why are we only seeing this now? Why was this offense, which is clearly a different offense than what Michael Penix was running, why are we seeing it for Kirk Cousins and we were not seeing it for Michael Penix? And, I think the coaches, I don't know if they'll say this, but I think if you were to ask them and give them the truth serum, they would just say that, we don't think Penix is ready for this kind of quarterback operation at this point in time. Again, turning his back to the defense, maybe and potentially even physically mobility wise. Like I know we kind of laugh at the notions of Kirk Cousins being like athletic in any kind of way, although he did truck stick somebody today. um, but like, is he actually more capable of kind of getting out from under center and getting to that outside zone and having proper footwork in some of these play action sequences versus Michael Penix? I mean, I think that is whether Penix is capable of it or not is less material than the case. What is the case right now? Like, how good are they at executing these types of plays right now in their careers? Whether it's due to capability, whether it's due to experience in their playing careers. And I think it's clear that Kirk Cousins is better at doing that, or I think that that's what they think. Now, again, whether they will ultimately be that kind of open about it, we will see. But, it was, again, certainly effective. In fact, there were even opportunities out there that the team either didn't capitalize on or just kind of, frankly, gave up a score. The Falcons do give up a touchdown to the Saints off of a deflected pass that just hits Kyle Pitts in the hands. I will say, like, it looked like he was getting grabbed. It looked like there was a case for a defensive pass interference there, but the ball did still hit his hands, and he also had a couple other drops in this game that were proving to be very frustrating before the Falcons kind of got the ball rolling a little bit more offensively. But I think whether however effective you want to say it was just interesting to say the least. And I think that hopefully we will get some more kind of context around why they moved to this type of offense. And not necessarily do we think we'll see more of it, because we will, but just kind of, figuring out exactly why we're seeing it now. And I think we can kind of assume a lot of things along that front, but an interesting development with this team. Certainly is. So let's talk about the Falcons defense. Again, just you felt like this was going to be one of those weird games. It just typically feels that way when you go down to the Superdome in New Orleans, and they have they've got Taysom Hill, and they've got these weird players, and they've got all these designer plays. Jeff Ulbrich was talking about it this past week, where the Saints, it feels like there's, a book just full of like these like specialty plays that they run with these weird personnel sets and weird players and weird motions. We saw them get into a wing tee set on a short down a distance to try to pick up a yard. And, that's just the kind of thing that they do. And it feels like one of those games where if you have a player that falls asleep on a given play, that the Saints are going to take advantage of that and kind of burn you. And whether the defense overall played well or not, just depends on whether you give up some of those big splash plays that ultimately allow points. And the Falcons defense never did that. They made the Saints work for pretty much everything they got. In fact, now that I'm thinking about it, I mentioned that one of those kick returns resulted in points, but now I'm even wondering if it did. I can't even remember at this point. But that touchdown that the Saints scored came on defense, so it definitely wasn't a touchdown. I think they did maybe kick a field goal. The Saints also missed some field goals in this game too, so they didn't help themselves at all. But again, to get back to the Falcons defense, just a professional performance, and really a professional performance from the entire football team. And the entire football team deserves credit for having this approach when I thought that this was a week where there was a potential for like a further tailspin to, after you kind of maybe not mathematically get eliminated, but realistically get eliminated from playoff contention last week. You come out and you don't have these mental slip ups. You do come out with a top level performance of what this team can be, or at least what they've shown recently. So just an overall good job there. But I thought that was just exemplified by this defense. And you have to wonder if now that Devine Diablo is back in the fold on this defense, if they're just kind of back to being a top 5 type of unit like they were during much of the portion of when he was healthy earlier in the season. And I say that because I can just think of so many plays that Devine Diablo was making. And obviously, there were a lot of other players that were making plays, but man, it just seems like he's one of those guys who just shows up everywhere. He's just an absolute ball hawk. Whether it's run stuffs up the middle, whether it's getting to the edge, whether it's playing in coverage. You can do so many things with him. He's so versatile just because of the skill set, the physical tool set, especially that he has. And he's also got the smarts to be able to know where he's got to be, and the instincts to get there quickly. The instincts is something that we really saw kind of rear its ugly head with JD Bertrand. I think we've also seen it with Troy Anderson, where they're a tick delayed in kind of getting to where the ball is going to be going. And Devine Diablo does not seem to have that little slight delay that can really hurt linebackers whatsoever. Also saw Ronnie Harrison come up with a big play on a 4th down to turn the Saints over on downs with a batted pass. And, he was a guy who started to get more and more snaps in Devine Diablo's absence. But Jeff Ulbrich said it in practice this week that he's a player who has absolutely earned snaps on his own, even when Devine Diablo is healthy. And he showed it on that play. So credit to Ronnie Harrison. But I think obviously the main headline from this Falcons defense coming out of this 24-10 win is going to be from the defensive front and this team's general pass rush. I mean, they continue to set a benchmark for this Falcons franchise in what they've been able to do rushing the passer since their inception, breaking a franchise record in this game with their 4th straight game with 4 or more sacks. And they have 5 in this one. Again, 1.5 for Devine Diablo, 1.5 for Brandon Dorless. Jalen Walker gets a sack. Ruka Rororo gets a sack. So you get 4 different players combining for 5 sacks. And it just feels like on any given play, there's another player who can pop up in the backfield. Arnold Ebiketie probably should have had a sack in this game, did not. We know Leonard Floyd can get home. David Onyemata had a big tackle for loss, so not a sack, but it's clearly a guy who can get into the backfield. And there was even more on the table potentially for this Falcons team. In fact, Tyler Shuck is such a obviously a rookie and not like a great quarterback, but really is good at getting the ball out of his hands in creative ways. And if it weren't for some of that ball handling skill that he has, the Falcons may have had a couple more sacks than they even got credited for in this one. So just another really good performance. I don't have the numbers yet on blitzing and kind of Jeff Ulbrich and the scheme that he was utilizing in this game. But I will be interested to look at that to see if they were able to generate any more of these pressures with a little less blitzing in this game, because Jeff Ulbrich has been the number 1 blitzing defensive coordinator in the NFL so far this season. And for the most part, it's worked, but also they've gotten burned at times and at some crucial times that has really kind of unfortunately cost them. I don't want to say the game kind of rests upon Jeff Ulbrich and some of these play calls, but they have been really crucial plays that have gone against them in part because of his aggressiveness. But, it just felt like a pretty smooth day for this Falcons defense. Do have an injury, concerning injury at one point with Xavier Watt staying down on the field, and it looked like he was holding his knee. They went to a TV timeout, but he was back in the game, and then secures the ultimately the game-sealing interception in the end zone at the end of it. So a good performance from this Falcons defense. Again, it's like it's a poor Saints offense, but it just felt like with the way that this Falcons season was heading, on top of the kind of spookiness that the Falcons kind of have in that stadium, especially in recent years. And you just, yeah, and it's kind of pairing that with the way that the Saints, keep getting away with this. Like, that's how it feels a lot of times when the Falcons go down to New Orleans and play and lose in some bizarre fashion. None of that happened. They made their field goals. They didn't turn the ball over in egregious ways, and obviously, they Saints do have a pick six in that game, and I guess it was kind of egregious in the way that it just bounced off of Kyle Pitts. But it's not like you were making these embarrassing turnovers late in the game that gets the team back in it or anything like that. It was just very smooth and again, professional win. And it's exactly what you wanted to see. Like I said, it's going to be infuriating, I think, for some people who they've been waiting for this over this 5-game span, and it has not come. That's tough. I don't really have any great answers for that, because I may consider myself to be one of you, to be perfectly honest. But ultimately, a good win for the Falcons. Again, a 24-10 win over the Saints in the Superdome. They get to 4-7 on the year, still with some winnable games coming up, the Jets, etc. So we will see what this Falcons team does. Again, can they build on this Kirk Cousins performance? Does this offense expand at all? Need to change it all? I did think, by the way, we should say before we get out of here, I thought, going back to the offense, I thought the running game looked better as a result as well. It's not like the rushing numbers were anything gaudy, but I thought that the team was better able to utilize players like Tyler Algier, and obviously the game state plays into that too. Now that I'm looking at it, Tyler Algier only averaged 3.7 yards per carry, but it felt like he had some consistent chunks on the ground, and Bijan runs for 14 for 70, so that's a good average clip right there, although that's kind of he has a 32-yarder on that little screen pass that went backwards. But I just thought that generally it looked smoother for this offensive line. Cousins was a little bit rushed at times, but didn't see a ton of the kinds of quick wins by Saints defensive linemen, especially when they were able to get the play action game going. I really thought that kind of put the Saints a little bit on their heels, gave them a little bit of indecision, and they just weren't able to as aggressively kind of bum rush the either the running back when he gets the ball, or just kind of bring pressure really heavily right off the snap, like I think a lot of teams have been doing against this Falcons team. And the Falcons haven't really had some of the answers in those situations to get rid of the ball quickly, and to hot routes, or however you want to try to solve those situations. But thought Kirk Cousins did a better job of that today, and maybe the offense also helped him not really be in so many of those situations. So again, a little bit more to chew on there, but yeah, thanks you guys so much for listening. If you're watching us on 92.9 The Game's YouTube channel, and if you are watching us, please give us a click like. Do that, please. Hit like, and then you can download the podcast. If you listen to us on audio form, just search Joe Patrick on football wherever you get your podcasts, and we should pop up, and you can follow us there. We will be back later this week to talk a little bit more, talk about some of the context, some of the questions about this offense that we have in terms of how we got to this point and maybe where we're going with it, et cetera, et cetera. So thanks, guys, for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.